The first thing I noticed was the sound. A sharp, impatient knock. Not polite, not hesitant. The kind of knock that assumes you'll open the door because you owe whoever's on the other side. I froze in my living room. One sock half off, my phone still glowing in my hand. I hadn't been expecting anyone. No deliveries. No friends. No neighbors. And certainly not her. Then the knock came again. Harder. My chest tightened as a familiar, unwanted instinct kicked in. The one I thought I'd buried years ago. The instinct to brace myself. To prepare for disappointment. To lower expectations so far underground they couldn't hurt me anymore. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. I already knew. When I finally opened the door, there she stood, my mother, flanked by the man she chose over me, both of them wearing the same expression they always had when they wanted something. Not remorse. Not love. Expectation. "I need to talk to you," she said, already stepping forward as if this were still her house and I were still the child she could move aside. That was the moment I knew. She hadn't come to apologize. She hadn't come to make things right. She had come for my money. I was born into a life that always felt temporary, like I was renting space in my own family. My mother had me young. Too young, if you asked her on the wrong day. She used to tell the story like a warning, not a memory. How my biological father vanished the moment responsibility appeared. How she did it all alone. How much she sacrificed. And for a long time, I believed her. My grandparents filled in the gaps she couldn't. Warmth, consistency, unconditional support. They were the reason I learned early how love was supposed to feel. When she remarried, I tried to be optimistic. I told myself this was a new chapter. A bigger family. A second chance. But families don't always grow. Sometimes they replace. When the twins were born, the house shifted overnight. The air changed. Conversations happened without me in the room. Doors closed softly but deliberately. I learned how to become quiet without being asked. I told myself it was temporary. That things would stabilize. They didn't. One evening, they sat me down at the kitchen table. The same table where I used to do homework while my mother cooked dinner. She didn't look at me when she spoke. They told me I was old enough to understand. That things were tight. That sacrifices had to be made. What they really meant was simple. There was no room for me anymore. They didn't kick me out outright. They were careful. Strategic. They talked about finances. About space. About priorities. About how the younger children needed them more. I remember offering solutions. A job. Helping out. Shrinking myself even further to fit wherever they'd allow me. That's when my mother said it. That they deserved the resources more than I did. Not needed. Deserved. I left that house with a bag I packed myself and a silence so loud it followed me all the way to my grandparents' door. They never told me where to go. They didn't have to. I worked. Studied. Survived. I paid for my education the hard way. With exhaustion, loans, and stubborn pride. I celebrated milestones alone, or with the people who actually showed up. My mother didn't come to my graduation. Didn't call. Didn't ask how I was doing. And eventually, I stopped hoping she would. I built a life anyway. A good one. And that's what brought her back. Standing there now, years later, she scanned my home the way someone appraises property, calculating, assessing value. "You've done well," she said finally. "No congratulations. No apology. Just confirmation." I stepped aside and let them in. That was my mistake. Because the moment they sat down, I realized this conversation was never about the past. It was about what they believed I owed them for surviving it. And as my mother leaned forward and said the words, "We need your help," I felt something settle deep inside me. Not fear. Not guilt. Resolve. Because this time, I wasn't a teenager they could push out quietly. And I was done paying for choices I never made. Once they were inside my living room, everything felt upside down. They didn't sit like guests. They sat like people reclaiming territory. My mother placed her handbag neatly beside her chair, right where she used to drop it in our old house. As if muscle memory had decided we were rewinding time whether I liked it or not. I stayed standing. That alone annoyed her. "So," she began, folding her hands together. We heard you've been doing very well. I waited. Her husband cleared his throat and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Your uncle mentioned your promotion. Said you're in a very impressive position for someone your age. There it was. Not I'm proud of you. Not you worked hard. Just surprise. The kind that implies they hadn't expected me to amount to much. I shrugged. I worked for it. Yes, my mother said quickly. But you didn't tell us. I actually laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. Short. Sharp. Disbelieving. You didn't notice I disappeared for years, I said. Why would you expect updates? Her lips pressed together. That familiar irritation flickered across her face. The one I remembered from childhood, when I asked too many questions or took up too much space. We always assumed, she said slowly, that when you were ready, you'd come back. That word, assumed, landed like a slap. They spent the next several minutes talking around me instead of to me. About how difficult things had been. About sacrifices. About risks they'd taken. About how unfortunate it was that their business venture hadn't worked out. I noticed something strange then. They never once asked how I was. Not emotionally. Not mentally. Not even physically. Eventually, the truth crawled out from beneath all the excuses. The twins were approaching college age. And they were panicking. We thought, her husband said carefully, that since you're established now, you might want to contribute. My stomach dropped. Contribute to what? I asked, though I already knew. My mother sighed dramatically, as if I were exhausting her. To their education. You know how expensive it is. And family helps family. I stirrte her. Really stared. You're asking me to pay for their college, I said. She nodded, relieved I'd finally caught up. Not entirely, of course. Just significantly. I felt heat rise up my neck. My hands curled into fists at my sides. You didn't help me, I said quietly. That's different, she replied immediately. Of course it was. She launched into a speech I'd apparently been cast as the audience for. About priorities, about timing, about how they had younger children then, about how I was almost grown when they asked me to leave. Almost grown. Homeless enough to need my grandparents. Young enough to need parents. You told me, I said, that the children deserved your money more than I did. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Well, she said, they needed us. I laughed again. This time it wasn't accidental. And now, I said, they need me. Silence. Her husband tried to recover. You're successful because you're strong. Independent. This wouldn't hurt you. There it was. Success as a reason to exploit me. You want me to fix the future you didn't plan for, I said. After pushing me out of yours. My mother leaned back, crossing her arms. You're being dramatic. That word used to shrink me. This time it did the opposite. I reminded them, calmly, clearly, that I worked through school because they refused to help. That I carried debt alone. That I celebrated achievements without them. That I survived because I had no other choice. And then I said the thing that finally cracked the room open. You don't get to abandon me when I'm inconvenient, and adopt me again when I'm profitable. Her face hardened. She accused me of holding grudges. Of being resentful. Of refusing to move on. I pointed out that they were the ones standing in my house, demanding money from the child they discarded. When I told them no. Firmly, finally, without apology, the masks came off. She called me selfish. Ungrateful. Cold. She said this was my chance to make things right. I stood there listening, amazed at how familiar it all sounded. Because even now, even after everything, she was still asking me to disappear, just in a different way. And that's when I asked them to leave. They didn't take it well. I thought asking them to leave would end it. I was wrong. At first they just sat there stunned. As if they couldn't comprehend that the conversation had ended without their permission. My mother stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. You don't mean that, she said finally. I replied. My voice surprised even me. Calm. Steady. Unmoved. Her husband stood up, pacing slowly, like a lawyer preparing a closing argument. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. We're talking about your siblings. I tilted my head. The siblings who grew up with two parents. A stable home. College savings. That doesn't mean life was easy, my mother snapped. No, I agreed. But it means they weren't told they were disposable. That's when she lost her patience. She accused me of being difficult when I was younger. Said I was too sensitive. Too present. Always hovering. She reframed my loneliness as neediness, my confusion as defiance. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I had been a child trying not to disappear. And now she was rewriting history to justify erasing me. You're no better than us, she said suddenly. You're doing the same thing we did. That one almost made me laugh. You protected your future by throwing me away, I said. I'm protecting mine by saying no. Those are not the same. She stood too, now face to face with me, her voice rising. She talked about sacrifices. About sleepless nights. About how she'd given up opportunities to raise me. As if motherhood were a favor. As if love came with an invoice. I reminded her, gently at first, that raising me wasn't charity. It was responsibility. That I didn't owe her repayment for doing the bare minimum required of a parent. That's when the insults started. Ungrateful. Heartless. Selfish. Her husband chimed in, accusing me of forgetting where I came from, of turning my back on family now that I'd made it. The irony was almost impressive. You turned your back on me when I had nothing, I said. I'm standing here because I survived that. They didn't like that answer. My mother's voice dropped, low and sharp. This is your chance to fix things. I shook my head. No. This is your chance to take responsibility. And you're refusing it. That's when I stood up straight, opened the door, and repeated myself. Please leave. They argued, blamed, deflected, until I said the one sentence that ended the debate. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. The room went silent. My mother looked at me like she'd never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. As they finally walked out, she turned back and said, "One day you'll regret this." I didn't answer, because the regret she was describing belonged to her, not me. I thought that was the end. Then the emails started. Long messages cataloging everything she'd ever done for me. Every meal. Every school pickup. Every sacrifice, carefully itemized like emotional debt. I ignored them. She sent more. I blocked her. She made new accounts. I blocked those too. Each message carried the same theme. Guilt, obligation, revisionist history. Until one morning, my phone rang at work. The receptionist's voice was tense. "There's a woman here insisting on seeing you. She says she's your mother." My stomach dropped. I wasn't even in the building that day. When I spoke to her on the phone, I told her, clearly, firmly, that if she caused a scene or returned, I would involve lawyers. That my employer would not hesitate to protect me. For the first time, she sounded scared. She left. But something in me knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Because people who feel entitled don't give up easily. And desperation doesn't make people reasonable. It makes them reckless. I wish I could say the fear crept in slowly. It didn't. It arrived all at once, sharp and disorienting. The moment I realized my mother no longer cared about consequences. Only control. After the incident at my workplace, I stopped sleeping properly. Every unexpected sound made my shoulders tense. Every unknown number felt like a threat. I double-checked locks. I varied my routine. I hated myself for it. But trauma has a way of resurrecting instincts you thought you'd outgrown. I told myself she'd finally understood. That hope lasted exactly 1 week. I came home one evening, tired and distracted, keys already in my hand, and saw her standing near my door. Not knocking. Waiting. My heart slammed so hard I felt dizzy. She stepped toward me the moment she saw me. Fast. Too fast. "I just want to talk," she said, her voice brittle. Eyes wild in a way I'd never seen before. I raised my phone immediately. "Leave. Right now. Or I'm calling the police." Something in her snapped. She lunged. I barely had time to react before she collided with me, knocking me backward. My phone flew from my hand, skidding across the pavement. She was shouting, blaming me, screaming that I'd ruined her life, accusing me of betrayal, abandonment, cruelty. It took a second for my body to catch up with my mind. Then instinct kicked in. I pushed her away, hard enough to create distance but not injury. She stumbled, furious, still trying to get to me. The shouting drew attention. Doors opened, voices rose, footsteps hurried closer. My neighbors intervened before I could even process what was happening. Someone called the police. Someone else stood between us. When the officers arrived, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. I pressed charges. That decision felt surreal, like stepping out of my own body, but I knew with absolute clarity that if I didn't act, this wouldn't stop. Later, I learned the fallout. Her husband had taken the twins and left. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she'd lost control. Just the first time there were witnesses who refused to look away. She tried to justify herself. Tried to blame me. Tried to frame it as provocation. No one believed her. I met with a lawyer the next day. They used words like harassment, assault, restraining order. Words I never imagined would apply to my mother. But once spoken, they made everything painfully clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was escalation. And it was over. When the restraining order was finally filed, something unexpected happened. The noise stopped. No emails. No surprise appearances. No guilt-laden messages masquerading as love. Just silence. And for the first time, that silence felt safe. I started thinking about moving. About bigger spaces. About futures not built around defense mechanisms. I went back to the gym. Back to laughing without that tight knot in my chest. I talked to my grandparents. They were shaken, angry, protective. They told me they were done excusing her behavior. That they stood with me. That mattered more than I realized. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. But part of me still wondered, not whether I was wrong, but whether this was really the end. Because people like her don't reflect. They redirect. People talk about closure like it's a single moment. A conversation. An apology. A realization that ties everything up neatly. That's not how it happened for me. Closure arrived slowly, in ordinary moments. The first morning I woke up without checking my phone. The first week I realized my shoulders weren't permanently tense. The first time I laughed without feeling guilty for being happy. The restraining order changed more than just my legal reality. It changed my internal one. For the first time in my life, my mother no longer had access to me. Not emotionally, not psychologically, not physically. And once that door closed, something else opened. Space. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been shaped around avoiding her disappointment, her anger, her needs. Even after years of silence, she'd still been living rent-free in my head. Not anymore. Her husband didn't reach out. I heard through family that he'd moved in with his parents, taking the twins with him. Apparently, when the dust settled, he finally saw what everyone else had been managing around for years. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. And relieved. My grandparents stopped making excuses for her. They apologized, not for what they'd done, but for what they hadn't stopped. We had long conversations, the kind that hurt a little but heal a lot. They reminded me that love doesn't abandon you when it becomes inconvenient. I believed them. I also spoke with my uncle again. We cleared the air completely. He owned his mistake without defensiveness, and that mattered. Relationships survive accountability. They die without it. That was one of the biggest lessons I took from all of this. I moved a few months later. A new place. More light. Different streets. No memories hiding in the corners. The first night there, I slept with the windows open, something I'd never done before. Nothing bad happened. That felt symbolic. At work, I kept rising, not out of spite, not to prove anything, but because I finally had the energy to focus on my future instead of defending my past. Success stopped feeling like rebellion and started feeling like alignment. I stopped asking myself whether I'd been too harsh. I wasn't. I stopped wondering if I owed her something. I didn't. I stopped replaying the what-ifs. They didn't matter anymore. Here's the truth I learned. The one that took me years to accept. Being someone's child does not make you their emotional retirement plan. Surviving neglect does not obligate you to fund the people who caused it. And forgiveness does not require access. My mother may never understand what she lost. But I finally understand what I gained. Peace. Boundaries. A life that doesn't require me to shrink. And that is something no one gets to take from me again. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.